Welcome back to Reformed Millennials, the podcast where finances, economic trends, and sports intersect. Cam and Joel help listeners better invest their time and money. Also, it's important for listeners to understand that investing in equities, fixed income instruments, and/or alternative asset classes involves substantial risk of loss. Any action you may take as a result of the information presented in this podcast is your own responsibility. The information in this podcast is presented as a general educational, informational, and entertainment resource only. While Joel is registered to provide investment advice, this podcast does not provide individualized investment, tax, or insurance advice, nor is it meant as a recommendation to any listener to buy or sell any specific securities or otherwise take any other form of investment action. This is an excerpt of the full legal disclaimer that's available on the landing page of this podcast, which includes whether Cam Pitchers or Joel Shackleton have any ownership or interest in the specific securities discussed in this podcast.
Hey Joel,
Cam,
welcome to downtown officially. The
Yes.
real downtown.
Yes, I've been introduced.
Yeah, I've been very excited for our listeners. Joel has just recently moved offices, and he's about 12 paces if I were to walk outside to another building. So I'm very excited to have you even closer because I don't see you enough as it is, and you're now officially going to be in the core, and
Yeah.
I'm really excited about it.
I know, I'm pretty pumped myself. I have a funny story. I was walking in with my box, as one does, into their new office.
Yeah, with your plant and your pencil holder and everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm walking in, and I'm with this big, tall guy. And it looks like I'm being escorted out of the building. And Ben, a friend, looks at me, looks at the big guy, and he's like, "What happened?" And it's more important to know that Ben is also a criminal defense lawyer. And he's like, "Dude, what's going on?
Do you need my
I'm
assistance?
like, "I'm going into the building. I'm not leaving."
That's so good.
So
The other thing I was going to ask you about is now obviously heading into new office, new people around you. I'm assuming you're going to get asked to go into a NFL fantasy league within seconds of arriving, because now that is where the main focus goes. I was just thinking how much we are in the dog days of sports, and everything kind of goes on hiatus. The off-season stuff, I know we've chatted previously about how do these sports franchises model themselves after the NFL, where they're constantly at the top of the discussion. They cannot do August. I'm sorry. It doesn't feel like anything ever happens in August with the winter sports, quote unquote, like the NHL and the NBA. They kind of go on complete hiatus in August. And now everyone's focus shifts outside of anyone who's a baseball fan, which maybe we'll talk about. You and I were chatting offline about maybe we need to look into how well the MLB has been doing this year with their new changes, but I don't know. Probably wait to the end of the regular season to see what the real data says. But outside of that, now everyone's talking about the NFL. It's starting to ramp up with preseason. You got all this, every sports headline out of the US is about some kind of camp talk. And it just makes me, I just completely buy into it. I just read every headline. I can't wait to know which sleepers I should be picking up on my fantasy team. That's the real August mandate from now on, is figuring that stuff out.
So I've been more reading about your favorite player. And here's the thing about me in fantasy. I just do what the computer tells me to do.
Analytic guy.
Yeah, exactly. So I hire a service. It picks my team for me. I mean, I wish I did that with my actual favorite team, but unfortunately, that was inherited. However, I've been much more interested in how arrogant the Jets are already.
Oh, it's perfect. Isn't it amazing how a franchise can adopt a player's personality?
If anyone can do it, it's a New York franchise, though. The Jets think that they're going to win the Super Bowl this year.
And they will. And I've been looking for tickets for the New York Jets in November already when they come in the West Coast, because I need to see my boy. Anyways, I digress. There's the dog days of sports right now. It's not necessarily the dog days of the market. So
no, it's been hot. Quite frankly, this year has been quite the relief, given that last year was so challenging. if we had two of those back to back, I don't know. I might have been, I don't know, maybe getting into teaching people how to play golf. I don't know what I was going to do. Not actually, but it has been a very good year, especially for tech stocks. Now, July brought a different flavor, and it was the story of breadth widening. So you saw participation from the rest of the market. So what does that mean? We, for the first 6 months, talked about the big six, and I had talked to you, or even on this podcast, I was saying that what we need to see is in order for this bull run to continue, we need to see broader participation from the rest of the market. And we got that in July quite significantly. The rest of the world started to participate. More specifically, emerging markets, actually. It's been lagging quite badly, and this past month, it's done quite well. Tencent was up, 11, 12% in July. And the rest of the world is taking part in this, and with the exception of Europe. Now, what am I talking about here? Well, if you start to look at oil is now back above $80. You start to look at, at least in my opinion, it's important to look at the BRICS. So you look at Brazil, you look at China, but more specifically the surrounding Asian markets, so Japan, Korea, all of those countries are starting to participate, and that is a very good thing. And this is very good, especially for value stocks. When you pull out the big seven, the big eight, you end up having a pretty underpriced S&P 500. And when you look at Canada more specifically, it's also quite underpriced relative to those names. And that's a good thing. It means that there's opportunity. Now, the last couple days, we're starting to see other companies report earnings. The big tech companies, yesterday Amazon went out. You had earlier in the week, you had Meta and you had Google and you had Microsoft. All of them. I mean, Microsoft is a little bit mixed. Amazon last night showed that they are still, by and away, the biggest cloud provider. Meta had a phenomenal quarter again, and what we're starting to see is other companies come in with mixed but stronger than expected. And that has been the story of the year. It's last year we were pricing in a major recession, 500 basis points in rate increases was going to cause the consumer to die, and none of that has actually transpired. Now, will that be the story of the back half of this year? I can't say one way or the other. I do think, and I'm going to point a few people or listeners to our newsletter again, because I'm going to post some really interesting mixed opinions on where this back half of this year is going to go. And I don't want to make this decision for anybody, but I'm in no camp yet, personally. I want to see how this plays out, but especially more specific to Canada. But I want to see where the consumer goes. I want to see how the incoming increase in spend on paying back student debt in the United States impacts the consumer. I want to see how these rate hikes actually impact the Canadian consumer with regards to how variable rate mortgages impact the people that haven't been able to lock in a fixed rate, people that are trying to buy new homes.
Refinance, yep.
We're starting to see the impacts of rate increases hit specific groups.
Yeah, and on a more macro level rather than just like day-to-day wallet spend
exactly.
issues. Yeah.
So I want to get a better handle on that, and I think over the coming podcasts I'll be talking about it more, and I'll be posting more about it. Just me and what I'm consuming and where I see as being important places to focus. So moving on, what's our next topic here, Cam?
Well, I was going to ask you whether or not, I know you did a bit of a deep dive just between you and I anyways on the Meta call and some of the information from either Zuck or other executives. And I was just wondering if one thing stood out to you specifically from the sentiment from that call, not necessarily the earnings and the their financial performance per se, but if that is what stuck out to you, then I guess talk about that. But if there was one thing in on the call on the earnings narrative that was given, I guess it would have been last week, that really stuck out to you.
Well, I think and this is more sadly political, I think, or I should say this points more to where I believe the biggest change in our cultural fabric is now we're starting to notice it. And this also plays into what I think should be another topic for today, is just the Canadian banning of media on social media platforms. But what I'm noticing is that their ability to pivot our addiction to short form video content, the fact that Reels is now a $10 billion run rate. Think about that.
Which is bang on with TikTok, from my understanding.
It's bigger than TikTok.
Yeah.
So Reels is now generating more revenue than TikTok does. So for those that said that TikTok was going to kill Facebook, that is insane. So,
well, and just the agility. I mean, we talk about the reaction times with all of these news items and trends and whatnot, and I think it's more than evident now just how agile even some of these massive companies can be in terms of getting what they need from an infrastructure standpoint to, I guess, compete with these emerging talents, these emerging companies like TikTok. Like, not that TikTok is dead. Like, not where.
No.
It's just that the fact that it's like, okay, well, this is working, and I think you've made the comment about how Zuckerberg is kind of the master of the Control C, Control V, and make it better.
Yeah.
And add in his own spin on things, obviously, with a lot of talented people around him. So I think that's just another example of saying, okay, well, this is a trend. This is something we already have the user base. We need to retain those users, and we need to do it fast. And I mean, fast, and in my head, fast with a company of this size is within the time frame that they've been able to do this, which I call it 12 to 18 months, and just in terms of shifting and putting money where they need to, and while still continuing their progression and their, I guess maybe not mandate, but just the keeping up with the Joneses in terms of their AI play. And I'm assuming they're still obviously investing in VR and whatnot as well.
Well, of course, and you know what, that hasn't changed, but luckily for them, they've been able to. There's been other important tech players who have sucked some of the focus away from Zuck, but also his year of efficiency has been something that's been well received in the investment market, well, by investors in the market. So I think he's benefited a lot from those things. However, it does speak to a lot of things around the idea of aggregators, the fact that they have 3 billion plus monthly active users. Mm-hmm. They just have this, they're ingrained into our lifestyle, our social fabric. They are able to control C, control V, almost all products, and add it into their product offering. And what I'm also noticing, at least personally, is that Apple has made their ATT transition. Facebook has clearly had the scale and the willingness to kind of impair its business for a minute, fix it, iterate, and then figure out a way in which they can then deliver high quality advertising to its user base while it's still consumable and doesn't irritate us. Mm-hmm. And the other social media platforms haven't been able to do it as well. So this is what I think is a really important moving forward. And right now we have a writer's strike, we have an in Hollywood strike per se, and you have what's also happening in Canada, where we're banning the delivery of news on social media platforms.
Yeah, I just picked up a quick article from yesterday from CTV. So I mean, pretty high level, but basically says discovering news articles and videos on Facebook and Instagram will soon become a relic of the past, as Meta announced its official ending news availability in Canada. So Meta said Tuesday, 2 days ago, that within a few weeks, it will remove news from all Canadian users of its popular Facebook and Instagram platforms. In June, the company started running a test that limited news for up to 5% of users, but now it's just moving out of the testing phase. Quote, in order to provide clarity to the millions of Canadians and businesses who use our platforms, we are announcing today that we have begun the process of ending news availability permanently in Canada. So that's from Rachel Curran, the head of public policy for Meta Canada. So that is, I think I had commented last week or week before I think it was last week, we started talking about this and said that by the end of 23 that we'd be seeing it. Obviously, from Meta's perspective anyways, they've said, okay, we're ready to go to to get out of this.
Yeah.
Which I know you have your own comments here, and again, I think I would just continue the sentiment that I shared, and I think you shared last week in relation to this. The fact that we are quote unquote at war with the
I think our
information
politicians are.
sharing. Yeah, it's just that it's taking a very, very hard line on this as it's currently written and how it's currently being rolled out, and I don't think that's the way of doing it. Am I completely against some regulation on this side of things? No, because I have seen firsthand in my life the power of what we always say disinformation, and how. So I think there's need to be regulation around it. I think there is, but it needs to be done in a different way, because how it's obviously being done right now is all or nothing in terms of the news.
I think it's also
cycle.
being sold as being a disinformation
100%
policy, and it's not.
That's
not what
that's
it is.
100% how it's being in your face.
So I got a quote from Ben Thompson, Stratechery. He yesterday posted something about all of this, and this is as a comment to that. And quote, "Here's the thing with corporate communication." So as a response to that, obviously whatever particular company spokesperson says is self-serving, which is obvious. However, that doesn't mean that it isn't true, and that applies to that Quran quote. Of course, it's true that publishers benefit from being able to put their links on Meta platforms. To a dramatically larger extent, the Meta benefits from them being there. It's a pretty tiny, and this is me speaking here, the revenue generated from those companies being on Meta platforms isn't even close to the traffic benefits that they receive. So effectively what they're doing here with this new policy is Meta now has to pay, let's use CBC as an example here. CBC posts on Meta platforms, so on Facebook or on Instagram. And then Instagram has to pay them because they posted on their platform for being there. I don't quite understand why, if you were to, I can't think of anybody who is invited for free, or not even invited. They came onto my property for free, and then they start using it, and then I have to pay them for being there. That's effectively what's happening here. And sadly, what's the reality is that what us content creators or news publications have done is they've cannibalized their business because big tech has provided this poison pill, effectively, which is you need us now because we have become the de facto place to go to consume content.
Yeah.
And now they control everything. What it's done to newspapers is what they're currently doing to Hollywood. And it's just a sad reality of the times. The technology itself, the big aggregators, or where everybody is, and you need to distribute there. And right now, our government has decided that in order to fund these government or these newspapers, big tech, it's got to come from big tech. And the way in which they're doing that is wrong, in my opinion. And I think Ben Thompson does a really great job in his article in stating that the way in which they want to extract their pound of flesh from big tech should be by way of taxes, not by way of the economics being redistributed somehow, because it just makes absolutely no sense. What Meta's going to do is just block them, and then this is going to cost them everything. And that's a poor way to approach this.
Yeah, take it as a cost of doing business rather than asking them to change their business.
Exactly. So be like, okay, you know what? You want to function in Canada. This happened in Australia. And I'm guessing here, our politicians have seen what happened with Rupert Murdoch and News Corp in Australia, the way in which it was built, or rather the policy built and then enacted. I think that we're trying to copy that, but it's actually gotten significantly. We've stepped it up a notch in Canada. So this is a long-winded way of me saying that I think that and I'm in agreement with you, I think there needs to be, I'm of the opinion that news in Canada is incredibly important. It should be a right in the same way that we have a right of postage, we have a number of rights in Canada. I do believe that our news organizations and journalists need to be protected in the same way that I think comedians should be protected from being canceled. I think that our news publications need to be protected. The way in which they're funded, I have less of a problem with that than perhaps some other people, especially more conservative people, might approach this. I do believe, while I don't love that the government is handing out and picking winners here, I do think that the business model is impaired. It doesn't work anymore. The old way, anyways.
Yeah.
And unless you're going the subscriber route, which Canada doesn't quite have the population, it doesn't have the interest. The reason why it works in the United States is because someone from Europe will buy a New York Times subscription. Someone from Canada will. No one's buying CBC subs in Europe. So, again, I think that what we should do is have a tax on these big tech companies in Canada. We should not be restricting news from people because this is how we do it. Mm-hmm. And if they take Google search and if they take meta platforms away from us in terms of how we access news, I don't know where we're going to get it. Email?
X.
Because Google also owns that. Twitter.
I think, like the commentary earlier about Meta's ability to transition, adapt, be agile with the changing landscape within their different business segments. This is the polar opposite in saying, the old adage, adapt or die. These companies, these huge publications and news outlets have not been able to do that in an agile way. I think some in Canada have been better than others without pumping any specific tires, but I think some have really developed a good online platform and a digital presence where you can still see their stuff. But to your point, the reach is not to the same degree. We have 30 odd million people here. The interest in Canadian politics, business, real estate, etc., is very niche from the world perspective, as you put it. And they definitely are fighting an uphill battle. And with these tech giants, as you put it, providing people with a lower barrier to entry in terms of producing the content and getting it on to a platform where someone can see it, I think is a good thing. And then I guess the end of my point here is just that this is very typical of government policy in general, and I think for sure for Canadian government, it's to kind of overreach and then claw back, and that's where I obviously see this going. I don't think that very many constituents will be very happy, even on both sides of the aisle, for that matter. I think as many people click on news articles on Facebook or Instagram on the left and the right are probably very similar. So I think there's going to be some public backlash with this, and they're going to take in the information in terms of what public wants to see, as well as how much does this affect our businesses and our economy in Canada. And then we'll revamp things and kind of pull things back and pull.
It's a working document, is what you're saying.
It seems to always be a working document, yes. So it's not the best in the world that we have to kind of start here, and that obviously even the timeline, I feel like, based off of other rhetoric that I had read over the past couple of months, has been sped up. Like the fact that Meta has said essentially over the next couple of weeks, like we're talking here on August 3rd, that before the end of August, all this is going to be pulled. I think that's a little bit earlier than maybe some people thought. And it is going to be, I think it's going to be quick and swift with the backlash. So
yeah, it's never a good thing to create policy based off of myths. And the unfortunate reality is that a large majority of people don't understand how these large aggregators make money and the way in which the dynamics of who benefits who actually stacks. A lot of people think that Facebook, Instagram, even Google search for to a lesser extent, and YouTube, are all those businesses are benefiting from news organizations. And it's the complete and utter opposite. Mm-hmm. So
it's going to be an ongoing. For our listeners, I think this is something that's definitely worth continuing to follow.
Huge thing, I think.
Unfortunately, you're going to have to go to CTV and CBC and the Globe and Mail and whatever else to continue to follow it. Which I would say do that, because I think it's an interesting thing to stay on top of and form an opinion on and how you feel about it. So
100%. So Cam, for those that are moving to Canada, and
yeah, this kind of came out, I guess, a couple of weeks ago. I think it was when it was first announced, this H-1B visa holder in the U.S. and the immigration to Canada option. So I'm going to give a really good Coles Notes here, or really short Coles Notes, and you can fill in the edges if you'd like. But essentially, H-1B visa holders, which would be a very specific or a specific subset of visa holders in the U.S. From a working visa standpoint, were offered essentially a free pass, if you want to call it that way, into Canada. Up to 10,000 people were accepted, and these were specific to the tech industry, is my understanding, in Canada, and essentially that they can come over and work in Canada so those who are on not actually expiring visas, but on visas that people maybe don't have jobs currently, et cetera, in the U.S. are able to come to Canada and seek employment. And obviously this is a big benefit for tech companies in Canada as well. They would have kind of a direct line to this list, call it, and be able to search for new talent. And so it was capped at 10,000 as it currently stands, and within 48 hours, all 10,000 spots were filled. And so I think maybe I'll let you talk about some of the positives and takeaways from that. I think the most important thing over the next 3 years with this program, and whether or not it expands to more different industries, et cetera. I know there's various kind of visa work programs that we have in Canada for kind of a partnership between us and the U.S., or kind of using U.S. vetting to kind of help with expediting on the Canadian side, is whether or not they're able to retain those people past those 3 years. So I think attracting talent right now, this is a really quote unquote easy way of having, I guess, a vetting process already being completed over it, or get those folks over into Canada working for companies, hopefully a part of a growth scheme here in Canada and in the tech industry specifically. What are those companies? What are we going to do as a country to make sure we're retaining those people and keeping them here past the 3 years? Because anyone offers me a quote unquote, it's either the option is go to Canada or go home, like overseas, wherever that might be. I'm taking probably go to Canada in most cases.
Probably.
And very competitive wages, I would assume. And affordability, depending on where you're at right now in Canada, could be better than what you're coming from in the U.S. in certain areas. But again, fast forwarding 3 years, are we able to retain that talent at the end of the day? I think that was, from some of the articles I read, I think that's kind of the biggest question. Obviously, very positive in terms of the program itself, and obviously the fact that it was 10,000 people in less than 48 hours to fill it is really awesome and a very positive thing to see. But it's whether or not, okay, we're going to have these folks for 3 years. What are we doing to sell them on Canada and to continue to grow in Canada? And these 10,000 employees, how many of those employees turn into entrepreneurs that are going to start new businesses that are going to expedite this and grow and grow and grow, right? So that's what is the key. I think getting them in the door through this program is awesome and a really good idea, and I'm assuming this will be just the start of this. But
we don't want to be a feeder league for the United States.
Exactly.
Right?
You don't want to. It's almost like you don't the CFL, when your top talent, like for a sports reference, you get a Canadian Football League star and you grow them and they become a star after 5 years, and then you, from the league's perspective, you're like, oh, I want to market this person. They're huge in Edmonton, and then bye-bye, they're on the practice squad in Oakland making more money, and they're gone forever.
And that is the crux of Canada in many ways. I think that we are going to have a problem. How do we pay competitively, have competitive, affordable living, have tax rates in the 50s in many provinces, and still compete with the United States? That's where I think all of politics is going right now. It is going back to what it used to be, which is taxes and housing and affordable housing. And I'm a huge, huge believer in immigration. I think it is literally the number one competitive advantage we have in Canada. Mm-hmm. We do a phenomenal job. Not only that, it's pretty nice here. Now, with all that said, we also are incrementally increasing tax rates. And that is going to be a problem. We need to be competitive with the United States. If you look at the top tax brackets, if you look at even our corporate tax rates versus the United States and what it's like to operate a large company here, mm-hmm. we need to be competitive with California, New York, with Florida, with Texas, So
you can take California off now. No one wants to move there anymore.
Yeah,
so.
Okay, fair enough. They still have positive immigration, but I get it.
That's for the surfing folk.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely. Denver, whatever, right? So you have all of these pretty, like, objectively nice places that have considerably lower tax rates on the corporate and the personal side. Alberta's the only one that's even relatively close. And then we have this great feeder program with incredibly talented people from the rest of the world coming to our diverse culture. And I think we're very inclusive. I think we do a really nice job educating people. But how do we keep them, right? We don't have housing that's generally affordable unless you're in Edmonton or Calgary. Yeah. And you have this great way of getting people to come here. And I think that it's something that needs to be solved, and it's likely policy that requires this. And I don't know what that looks like. The United States just got credit downgraded from AAA to AA. They're like us peasants in Canada. We're in a position where our financial situation is very similar to theirs. We've been able to raise interest rates. Inflation has come back down in line. What does policy look like moving forward? This is a big opportunity, I think, for everyone in politics. And right now it is in flux. So I don't know and that's from a federal perspective. I'm not commenting provincially here. I'm just curious because we're really benefiting from it right now. And our distribution of age the demographics of Canada has really improved the last 5 years. And I give all the credit in the world to the Liberal government for this. How do we keep them? How do we house them? How do we have them have more children? How do we incentivize all these things while also not driving away our ultra-talented entrepreneurial people, which is happening? They are moving to America. So
yeah, there was, I think, from talking to a few folks anyways in kind of the capital Edmonton region here, in terms of we're very lucky and to have a university here and two universities that are doing really well, but U of A specifically in relation to developing tech talent. And I think there has been a shift a little bit in this province anyways from the kind of decision making on graduate, let's say software engineer, quote unquote, and getting an offer in the States versus staying here and working for a local company, starting your own. I think the gap has narrowed. I think with the shift in, well, we've talked about the number of headlines out of in terms of people being laid off in the States in the tech industry. And so the opportunities are not as grand as they were. The contact I'm talking about is kind of using 6 to 8 years ago as a comparison point. So I think we're at an influx, right? We're at a very pivotal point, I think that's what you just said, to say we have the ability to retain through certain programs and potentially in certain areas of this country more affordable living and opportunity from a wage perspective. How do we keep them? How do we keep developing it? And that's, as you point out, it's going to be shaped by policy. I think we do need to we keep talking about the housing issues. I did have a couple articles. I think we're going to skip over them this week. Maybe we do a bigger deep dive in an episode coming up on the housing market after.
I should just let's do a brief thing here. Let's talk a little bit about it.
Well, I was going to say June and July numbers aren't completely out yet. We're on August 3rd here, so maybe some more information to come. But I think looking at we keep talking, inventory appears to be the number one issue in North America in general. I think that's mirrored in the States as well, in terms of we keep talking about all of the interest rates going up, putting pressure on buyers and the ability to qualify as a buyer, and as well as existing wallet spend for people who are on variable mortgages, etc. That is one side of the pressure, but then the other side is immigration is up, inventory is very low in terms of new builds, and then obviously you have people who are sellers on the sideline. You've talked about the word or the kind of sentiment around anchoring to an old price that you thought your house was worth, and maybe it's not quite there in certain markets. Toronto maybe specifically right now. I don't want to sell right now. I can afford what I'm currently paying. I'm going to wait it out because I think that my house is worth X and I'm not going to sell for Y anymore. So you kind of have these counteracting issues. But I think from reading and talking to on this podcast and then reading from experts in this country, specifically, I think inventory appears to be the biggest issue as it currently stands. And that, again, inventory can be made up of brand new builds, existing home sales, etc. I've seen statistics to say that the ramp up on new build inventory for multiplexes and residential homes has been on the rise in this country. And that's what I maybe want to dive into a bit more specifically into the future. But at the end of the day, inventory appears to be the biggest issue in our major centers.
Yeah.
And that's what needs to be, especially when we're talking about doing a lot of good things, from strategic immigration to get skilled workers here, people who are the new entrepreneurial wave in this country, in addition to people who are homegrown. How do you keep them if they have nowhere to, if they're in a market where they don't feel like it is affordable, or what their dream is of building their business and building their life here in Canada isn't available to them?
Yeah. You know what I want to do? Next episode that we do on this, I'm going to bring in the mortgage broker that I used. He could talk about this a little bit. We'll do a 3-person pod, and we can ask him some questions, and then I will then act like an expert and not know anything and do my thing.
Yeah.
And I think it could be a decent show. But in the interest of staying on topic here, this topic that Professor Galloway, Scott Galloway, has been kind of pounding the table on. He's been talking about this for like a year and a half. You know what's interesting is that I've been reading his stuff for, 5 or 6 years now, and a lot of my friends have now started reading his books. I give the Algebra of Happiness out to a lot of people. Blaine just read it and said he loved it. I think this is a super important topic for men to start to think about, and even us as boy dads, I got to be thinking about this too as we raise our children, you know? And so this post from him is the changing shape of young men's days, and the average daily hours devoted to select activities for men ages 15 to 24. And from 2003 to 2019, you've seen a pretty significant change in things here.
Yeah, so he says among men ages 50 to 24 who spent at least some time playing games on an average day in 2022, the average time spent was 3.82 hours. So that's when we say games there, it's video games. Right. So young men in the U.S. are spending more time on video games and TV and less time working, exercising, and sleeping. So, yeah, I mean, I remember being that age and spending more time on those things. Obviously, this post, if you want to look at, I think this was on Instagram, I believe, that you pulled it from in terms of the graphic. And the comparative period is not very long ago. Like, this is obviously pre-pandemic. Yeah. So I think some of that might be skewed by the fact that, hey, lots of people didn't have anything else to do. For, call it 18 to 24 months of that period. Everyone was locked inside for the most part, or at least on an ad hoc basis. But I think some of the biggest shifts that are concerning to me is like the sleeping, the educational activities, and the sports, exercise, and recreation, which, I mean, is it harder to do? The sleeping, take it aside, was the educational and the sports, exercise, recreation harder to maintain during the pandemic period? Yes, but you can find ways to do things by yourself or in your house and continue to spend time doing those things. But what was easier to do? It's easier to sit on your couch and, of course, and hang out, right? So it is concerning, and I think it's obviously incumbent on, those young men's father figures, mothers, family, close friends, whatever it might be, to think about like having balance in your life from that standpoint. And I think we talked about productivity a couple of weeks ago. I think this graph is just kind of enforces that even more when you are spending more time on playing games, entertainment, which we talk a ton on this podcast about how the amazing ways to be entertained.
Oh yeah, there's no shortage.
Right? And
should never be bored.
So and the access to that is, I mean, all you need is your phone and internet and a Wi-Fi connection. You can have that wherever you are, whether you're working in the middle of nowhere, or if you're at your office, whatever, it's very easy to consume content.
Yeah.
And even, play games on your break or whatever it might be. It needs to be a conscious effort that you have to make to say, like, I don't know, something as simple as using the limits on your phone.
Oh, yeah.
For apps and stuff like that. I mean, like, I always ignore that stuff and just move on and be like, I need to see this golf video.
Yeah, this is one of those things where I don't have a problem. Everyone else has a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is not in my case. I have a problem and I know it. Yeah. But with that said, Adam Grant, who is... let me read his title. He's an organizational psychologist from Wharton.
Yeah, we've talked to him a few times in the podcast before.
He wrote a New York Times bestseller, Think Again, and then he has Thinking in Work Life as his podcast. I tend to like a lot of his tweets, but he had one that this is more of a comment, and he said, "When kids are deprived of play, their mental health suffers. Over the past 50 years, the time kids spend playing outside and inside has plummeted. They're missing opportunities to bond, build self-control, be creative, and feel joy. Free play is key to happiness and growth." And then he has this long piece that I'll quote.
Yeah, it's from the Journal of Pediatrics in the U.S.
Yeah, so this guy's obviously a very accomplished man. He knows what he's talking about, and it's just an interesting change in just I've said social fabric multiple times today. Mm-hmm. It is a change. Big change, and it shifted quickly. We humans do not adapt well to fast-changing environments, and right now we are in it. I had this really long conversation with someone that I really respect recently about the difficulties of dealing with misinformation, with the way in which we consume information. Like, you and I have been really good friends for a long period of time, but we have maybe 1% overlap in our days, in terms of from the time we met at 15 to now, right? And not even 1%, 0.1%, and we're close. And we are now assuming that we're going to, with all of this content distribution, no water cooler conversations don't happen anymore. There's no, this is the topic of the day, and because everybody's consuming different things, right? And I think that has now changed us to the point in which we are unable to deal with the differences of opinion because they've now fractured so much. So now with children and how we raise them and the way in which they're spending their time, I think we really need to, as parents, figure out why was it working for the last 40,000 years, or let's just say the last 200 years of civilized Western society. And over the last 20 years, it has changed a lot. How do we marry the two? How do we keep and grow healthy children during a time in which we have a massive change and differing of opinions and a weird media landscape and even an entertainment landscape, technology landscape? How do we marry all these things? And I really enjoy the conversations that Prof. G has on his podcast with a number of these, pretty accomplished
psychologists. Yep.
I don't know the right answer.
No, but I think it's something, again, and this isn't a popular answer, and again, I know we're in an opinion business for the most part, but I think taking a balanced approach to these things is the important thing, and taking a step back and understanding there needs to be some kind of balance between, this Journal of Pediatrics is more specific to younger children, specifically under the age of 18, but it goes into talking about, even from the age of 5 to 12 and how they're spending their time. Our discussion earlier was on young men. This is obviously just children in general. And it mostly, the excerpt, it's a much bigger journal piece, I'm sure, outside of what was shared by Adam just in his tweet, but the level of kind of unsupervised, they call it free time, that was spent by kids. And we're going to give boomers their credit here. In the 60s and 70s, you left your house at 3 o'clock and you could do whatever until dinner time when the bell was rung or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And that was that. There was no supervision. There was more responsibility heaped on children at a younger age. Whereas now it's, again, based off of either opinions that have been impressed upon people to say there needs to be more supervision, more hand-holding at certain levels of And I'm not saying like I'm going to send my 5-year-old to walk to school by himself or take the bus or whatever. That's not really, I'm not saying that's just one example of that they gave in this commentary to say, people were walking to school at 5 years old and they were given that responsibility and it was expected that they would be able to handle it at an earlier age. Whereas like now that's like the age in which that responsibility is heaped on somebody has continued to get older and older. And even like at 11, 12 years old, you're doing a paper route or you have a part-time job doing babysitting or whatever it might be. There has been a stretch out of that in terms of giving that kind of responsibility to kids at an earlier age. And if you wait to give that responsibility longer and longer as they get older, as this piece says, is that creates more anxiety and they don't feel comfortable in that situation as they become more aware and more developed because they haven't been given that type of, again, responsibility or job previously. And it even just talks about obviously giving kids the opportunity to like less screen time, more free play, exercise, random, just being together with other kids at their age. And so we've obviously gone through a very, very tough time for, call it the pandemic generation of kids that have grown up during, like there was a lot of restrictions if we were following them put on that age group. Yeah. But again, I think it just comes back to our kids, do we need to mimic what the 1960s or 1970s kids experience was? No, we do not, because that's not relevant anymore. There's a lot of things that we need to be doing differently and exposing them to at an earlier age or whatever it might be. But there are aspects of social development, as they kind of outline in this journal piece, and what Prof. Galloway has talked about on many of his podcasts. It's how do you take the good again from the past and make sure that there is still that balance in the development of young children and into adolescence and young adults, and giving them the tools to be able to have the social dynamic along with kind of the tech piece, if you want to call it. So definitely a challenging time for parents like us and many of the listeners, I'm sure, trying to navigate all of this. But again, I think it's trying to find that balanced approach as much as you can.
Yeah, 100%. So let's move on to recommendations for the week. I have a lot of reading to do on LK99 and superconductors. Someone who clearly doesn't have much science background, this is not an area of expertise for me. However, there has been a lot of drama.
You know that they're important.
Well, the sad thing is that the when stock prices move 4, 5, 6, 700% because of a new breakthrough in tech, I have to know. So LK99 over the last, call it 2 weeks, has had a number of breakthroughs. Some of them are proving to be fairly, let's call it just fake news. But there's some interesting information there. It's interesting to learn even how important a superconductor is. So now, next week, I intend on having a better opinion, better understanding here. But what I want people to understand about it, and this is how I'm thinking about it, it's like, if you remember Avatar, there is this thing called unobtonium, and it's multipolar, so it's not attracted to negative or positive, so it floats. This is this incredible superconductor metal that is only found on Pandora. That is what effectively this LK99 was thought to be. And we'll see where it ends up being. But to be sure, it is an important breakthrough if it works out. It doesn't seem to be the truth. But nonetheless, this is where semiconductors, superconductors, this is where we're headed. Never bet against technology, because if you do, you just end up looking stupid. The progress of humanity is ever interesting. Whether it be the news around nuclear fission and what happened earlier this year, and then you have stuff like this. And then we look at the climate arguments. I just think we're going to be able to solve all of the worldly problems because everyone on Earth is working towards them. because that's the way we're incentivized. So I'm optimistic forever.
Glass half full, Joel. I don't know.
That's me.
Everyone take a note and remember this day.
Yeah, so I'm going to be posting a bunch of that stuff, what I'm reading. I'll throw that in the newsletter. That's my recommendation for the week, since there's nothing else to do.
I got an oldie but goodie. So this is a sports podcast. So the Old Man and the Three, which I've talked about before and recommended before. So JJ Redick, ex-NBA player, has been kind of doing a media thing since the 2020 year, essentially, like a year before his retirement. Does this great podcast with Tommy Alter. They have been able, I think, because of his relationships in the game, he's had so many players who would probably not normally be given interviews come on his podcast. And so they're in their break period in August, but they're reposting some of their best interviews from the year. And they're having Damian Lillard on, which is, he's in the news a lot right now because he's got his trade demand, right? But anyways, he's a very interesting and thoughtful player. And so they just reposted his recently. So again, it'll be at the top of your list if you go to that podcast on whatever platform. And so I was listening to it the last 2 days, and it's just very interesting to hear people. It doesn't matter what industry it is, but then my interest obviously in sports, to kind of break down very granular things in their game or their mindset and speak to that. And so I think it's a great interview because he goes down as granular as how he learned to shoot differently and why he's so him specifically is one of the few players who can pull up from 35 feet and be accurate
50.
still, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So he kind of goes into that, and then again his mindset going into games and how he feels as a leader on his team and what he thinks he needs to do and how he starts games versus ends games, all that kind of stuff. And so I think it was really interesting just to hear that. Obviously from the player.
How he's going to do that in Toronto.
Definitely not Miami or bust, baby. So South Beach for him, but it's the podcast in general. I have recommended it before, again, for people who are maybe interested in basketball or enthusiasts or getting into the game. Does a very good job of kind of weighing out kind of news and then granular information and also breaking it down, like what certain things mean. So it's actually helped me understand the game a lot more and why certain things are done. And then also, obviously, like I said, the access to the players is pretty amazing. The fact that he's kind of getting all these people on that would not normally go into kind of long form interview styles with, call it, regular media. So it's interesting to see. He would be one example of, there's been, many of these ex sports players and figures who have transitioned into the media side of things very well, and they've been able to access, because there's that comfort level with not being in a big studio or in your kind of traditional media sense, having a more relaxed atmosphere and having someone that you have automatic trust with. And so the ability to kind of open up Pandora's box and get in some of these guys' heads is really interesting.
I've decided that I'm going to be pushing basketball on my young son, and I'm getting a Y
Well,
membership. I'm going to be playing pickup this winter.
He's going to be like dad. He's going to be a tall kid. So hopefully, like for that, like 6'3".
If he can learn to shoot like Dame.
Yeah, point guard. We got this. And we know the money. So please, please work out. And remember,
please.
remember Uncle Cam along the way.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, Cam. See you next week.
Yes, sir.
Wednesday.
Let's do it.